had another run-in the other day with guys and their damn headlights, though. Jesus. Oh. It was rough. It reminded me how much guys overuse their headlights at times in the surf.
Oh, it's the worst. I'm glad I don't have to deal with it very much. It's the absolute worst. I feel like we don't even want to do an episode. We don't want to open those cans of worms on that, Toby.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I should have expected it being a public, highly public, well-fished breachway, but it was still painful.
Yeah.
And I'll say even this, we're going to get to the episode in a sec, but if my 11-year-old son can point out to me how bad other people are using their headlights in the middle of the night, you'd think the other surfcasters would pick up on it. But, maybe I'll talk headlights and what I do and don't use in our gear recommendation episode.
Oh, you should. You definitely should. In fact, Toby, why don't we just start the episode? Why don't we just start the episode? Let's just leave all that in. Okay?
Well, yeah, let's get the actual episode of discussion today is going to be our lessons from the logbook.
Good transition. That was good.
Even though I was just getting into a lesson, I was learning about how people don't know how to use their headlights right. That's not going to be the lesson for today.
That was good. That's a good cold open. That was good.
It'll be just as educational, hopefully, but nonetheless, I'm going to hand it over to you, Jerry. You can start this episode. What did you learn from your log?
So we are talking about September of 2024. We're talking about the month of September, roughly. The last month, roughly, Lucy. I'm actually including just a touch of August in my thoughts. Over the past season, it hasn't been great. We've been complaining a lot. We haven't even been complaining as much as we've been complaining to each other. But I will say that, without going into numbers and stuff, because that's not the point. We're really talking about specific events and stuff. September was much better. September was almost normal. I'm not going to say it was good. I'm not going to say it was good. But I will say that if the rest of the season had been good or normal, I probably would have called September fairly normal. There definitely was still the absence of big fish for me, but there was a lot of numbers, hundreds of fish. I mean, we both had good numbers, caught a lot of fish, lots of teen fish, lots of 20-pound fish. And there's a lot for me to talk about because I fished so hard. I was definitely on the lash again this month, big time. There was one point, talk about now, I don't really want to go into this, but I was in my wetsuit for 12 hours multiple times. Fishing 10, 12 hours day, night. Yes, I did some daytime fishing. I'm not going to talk about that. Run around chasing blitzes, which is the worst. I remembered why that is not my favorite kind of fishing. I know guys love it. I know there's a bunch of anglers out there, men and women, who are like, it's my favorite. It's not my favorite, Toby. Not my favorite. This is not my favorite kind. For sure. I mean, and I caught some fish, but most of the time I was like, why am I doing this? I should come back here tonight. Something I'm not going to talk about, I want to bring it up, though, because I can't not bring it up, is that I got sharked for the first time. I got sharked 6 times, and one of the fish that I got sharked on was a 20-pounder, and it was gone the bottom third. Another fish that I got eaten was like a big schoolie, and it got eaten right to the gill plate. And we talked a lot about sharking in the last Lessons from the Logbook, or getting sharked, excuse me. So I'm going to leave that out.
I had one quick question for you. I meant to ask you at that time when it happened to you. Mm-hmm. Did you, or were you planning on filling out that the shark predation survey?
Oh, the thing is, I already had. And I was like, wait, can I go back? Excuse me, teacher. Can I go back and change my answers?
All right, because I filled it out. I wasn't going to initially, and then after when I ran into the previous month, I did, and we will throw in the comments on the YouTube. I know some of you are listening to the straight podcast side, but if you want to get a link to that, take a look at it. We'll put it in the comments on YouTube to link over if anyone wants.
We can put it in our show notes too.
Yeah, in the show notes too on the podcast, because it's I think it could be good to put that info out there.
Yeah. There's a study being going on about shark predation, seal predation too. Actually, they're both included in there. So but I mean, I got sharked. I've never been sharked before. Never would have thought it would have happened at this spot in particular. It was 3 feet of water. Maybe that these sharks are so big. Toby told a story about dumped a bunch of drag and this happened, but there was no drag dumping. There was no pull on the rod. These sharks were big enough. It was just chomp, fish, chomped, gone. Didn't even know what was happening. Bring it in. When the big one got chomped, I didn't even know what happened until I had my hand in its mouth. I mean, I had no idea. So, okay. That's not even what I want to talk about, though. There's so much that happened in September. The first thing I do want to talk about is something that's going to let all you podcast listeners yell at me and Toby, but mostly me, because I'm the one who did it. At the beginning of the month, at the end of August, I was seeing a lot of mullet. And I think actually when we look back on September 2024, all of us, we're going to remember it as a really big mullet year, a mullet month. Because, you know, I was talking to Shell Karras, our friend Shell, who was one of our very first episodes. I talked to him last week, and he was telling me that the situation in New Jersey is just off the charts. And this is the very end of September I'm talking about when I just talked to him. Now, he's a little bit freaking out because there's absolutely zero striped bass on it, and he's, like, very perplexed by that, even though it's kind of early or whatever. But I saw a lot of mullet, and I mentioned that in the last lesson from the log. I noticed that it was really small. I noticed that the mullet was extremely small. It was practically big spearing size, or maybe even smaller than that. I mean, it was real small. But it was doing the thing where skipping across the surface, and so I knew it wasn't spearing, and I was like, man, this spot where I get these freaking mullet, it's shallow, small bait, but I'm like, I don't usually fish anything small, but I thought, you know what, I should bring a small bomber. So I brought the small bomber, the 6-inch, the 16A. I brought it out, and I fished for a couple of hours. I mean, it was like an hour and a half, something like that, without a single hit. I didn't have anything. And I looked in my bag, and I went, this is because of the podcast. I'm carrying this friggin' thing because of the podcast. And I'm like, what are the chances I'm going to put this thing on here? I put that freaking bomber on there, cast it out. I had 4 fish almost immediately. And then I had one that was 25 pounds. And I went, oh my God. Guess what is on that bomber, guys? Guess what's on the bomber? A 2-0 treble hook. Yes! Yes, I admit it.
But it wasn't a stock. It wasn't stock.
No,
right?
No. It was a VMC, but it was a friggin' 2-0 friggin' treble hook. And actually, it wasn't even a BKK Viper, which is what I would actually would much rather be on there if I'm going to be doing that size. I was like, oh my God. I took a photo. It'll end up in an article at some point. It'll end up on my social media, and I'll make a post about it at some point. But that was actually a bite, though, that worked out. That those fish should have been there, and the mullet were there, and, you know, I had some fish, and I had that fish that was in the mid-20s. But I thought that was very notable from the log, given our discussion and our chastising of the 2-0 hook.
Now, you said you that was sort of almost a last resort plug. What did you cycle through before you got to that?
Oh my God,
that
everything.
Didn't work.
Everything. So 2 or 3 different kind of needles, mostly shallow runners. At that spot, I really like gliders. So I like swimming style gliders, fishing really fast, whether they're wood or plastic. You know, the West End Swim is the one that I talk about a lot that I really like. But there's, you know, multiple others. I did have a redfin, and the redfin did not work. Now, granted, looking back, I'm not a color guy. I am a little bit of a color guy, actually. I've become a little bit more of a color guy, having to do with contrast about where the fish are seeing it and how they're contrasting against the background. But the redfin, I do remember noticing at the time, the redfin at the time was blurple and the bomber was chicken scratch. So, but the thing about it is I didn't try the hydro, especially I didn't have a small hydro. I don't even know if I had a hydro that night, honestly.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so that happened. And it wasn't even like, I picked up a couple schoolies. It was like, oh, shit. And I immediately thought, like, I wasn't even, like, excited. That was my immediate thought, like, oh, man. Now I'm going to have to bring it up on the podcast. So all you people calling me an elitist, saying we don't get it, saying that we won't catch enough fish, blah, blah, blah. You can now start yelling at us again because, you know, you were...
Well, half of us.
Yeah, half of us. Yeah, exactly. So that's one notable thing. That week actually didn't work out as well as I wanted to, but that was a very interesting thing. The next thing that was really notable for me was fishing with my dad. You know, I mentioned way back at the beginning of the podcast things I was looking forward to. Dad and I didn't get to fish this summer. A lot of life stuff going on. It just didn't happen. Got my dad out, and this time around it was a lot different than the previous time when I took my dad out, where we kind of just went to Sand Beach and we fished Sand Beach, and it was kind of the same each night. We hammered fish. I mean, it was unbelievable, but this time around, I took him on a fall run, which we just talked about this. I took him on a fall run where we hit 7 or 8 different spots over the course of 2 nights. Only 3 or 4 of those are overlapping. I'm not going to count right now in my head for, you don't want to listen to me count. But we overlapped a little bit, but we ran around to a lot of different spots, and they were rocks, and they were current, and we bucktailed some, and we soft plasticked some, and needle fished some, and there was deeper water and shallower water. We found mullet V-waking. I'm pretty sure I heard bunker at one point. There was sand eels. There was tons of spearing. And so we ran around all these different places, saw a lot of different kind of baits, a lot of different kind of structure, a lot of different kind of spots, and we didn't catch anything. I caught one schoolie each night. It was the full moon, and it was super, super, super bright and extremely calm. And I told Dad, I was like, it's the risk, but we got to make it happen. And it was more about when could he come versus when the fishing was good, which is a lesson we all need to learn at some point. And I think maybe Dad learned it a little bit then, which was like, I made it work as well as I could, Dad, but as you can see, it's, when you can fish is not necessarily the best time to fish. But it was really fun. And it was really fun running around with him, talking him through the different spots. And, for this one, Dad, you're going to have to cast at this angle and let it swing. And this one, Dad, you cast it straight out. And no, put those lures away. We're not using those anymore. We're going to stick to these ones for this spot. And it was really fun. And he said he learned a ton. He said he learned way more this time than he did last time. Just seeing a different cross-section. So that was another very notable thing. And, as we get older, our time with our parents is more and more precious. And my dad's in great shape. I'm not trying to suggest anything about, the sun setting or something like that. But it did feel significant. And I'll say that. And so that was great. And I got to do a fall run. And actually in September, it's the only fall runs I got to do where I got to bounce around like that. The rest of the month just didn't really work out like that. Mm-hmm. And then the final thing, before I kick it over to you, because I've been talking a lot, is, I mentioned this a little bit already, but the whole year has been very unpredictable. This season has been bad. This season has been frustrating. I know, oh man, I've heard from a lot more people now. People I look up to, I consider better fishermen than me. I didn't realize how frustrating it really was for some people. I almost feel like I shouldn't complain, even though it was extremely frustrating and not good for me either. But in September, some things worked out the way they were supposed to. And I had some occurrences and some bites that worked out the way they were supposed to. And some really great things happened. One of those things was I had a night where I had so many fish in front of me, I couldn't catch them because I was snagging them. I could not even get my lure through the mass of fish. They were getting hooked on the tops of the head and in the back, and I snagged a 15-pound fish right in the tail, and I'm having fish come on and get popped off. And, I had fish in the 20s, deep into the upper 20s. So, they're not giants by any means. These are not really big fish, but these are, nice, fun-sized fish, 20 pounds, not inches. And it was just remarkable how frustrating it was, though, having such a great quantity of fish and having such potential is what I'm trying to get to. And then not be able to catch them. And then not be able to catch them because I'm snagging the goddamn things. So, a lot of people talk about, you got to fish around the edges of schools and you got to fish under the schools for the bigger fish. There was no doing that here. It's not like fishing a bait school. I tried fishing like away, sort of, and I started picking up schoolies, and I was having no schoolies before that, none. It's a very short tide window. The fish, they got into the current built, the current started to die, and as soon as the current was gone, the fish were gone, completely, done, shut off like a light switch. And it was fun, but it was frustrating. But that's definitely a bite that's going to stand out, I know, the whole season. Like, it's going to stand out in my head. I lost a really big fish that night, too. If you only got one shot at a big fish a season, one big fish a night, you're not going to land many big fish because you got to have a lot of big fish to play with because your percentages of landing big fish is so much lower. And by big, I mean like 35 plus. So I know a lot of people think 20, 25 pounds is big, but I'm talking really big. And there was one more night that I want to briefly mention too that really stands out in my mind because it also felt like a return to normal. And it was just, there was nothing exceptional on this particular night except that it was just beautiful, soft heave, rolling in, big blankets of white water. I was in my wetsuit. I had bounced there from another spot. I was like, all right, I'm tired of catching, 10 to 13, 14-pound fish. I got to go do something different because I had caught dozens. And I went to this spot, and it was these beautiful waves rolling in, and you kind of got to get out in it. So I'm kind of, duking it out with the water, getting tossed around, tripping and falling. The line gets knocked off the roller every once in a while because the waves, it goes from knee deep to chin deep. And the fish were just there, and they were aggressive, and they were hitting the Super Strike darter so hard, and it was awesome. And I had quite a few fish in the higher teens, and I had a few that were bigger than that into the 20s, one that was probably in mid 20s, and it was, again, no exceptional fish. These are not giant fish, but it was just like, this is fall. The wind's blowing. I got the nice, the waves. I'm duking it out with the conditions, and it was just this moment of like, thank God, because the summer was so tough. This is really fun, and you need a little bit of that to sustain you. So, and on that night, I will just say, thank God for the Super Strike darter, the zigzag. I don't know where we would be without it, because they wouldn't touch anything else. And when you put it, when you put it on, they're absolutely just annihilating it. And how many situations have I been in with that plug in particular? Forget about the bomber that I was talking about before. Forget about that. How many situations have I been in with the Super Strike darter where it's this or nothing? And it was just wind, whitewater, Super Strike darter, charged up fish, was awesome. And that's one of my best memories from the whole season at this point. So we'll see what happens going forward. But those are my lessons from the logbook. More like notable events than lessons, I guess. But that's it.
As you were telling that last one with the darter, I wanted to start my lesson from this past month's log on a similar story, but then I realized actually it's technically a story which I'm gonna have to save for next month. It was the best. I'll just tease it by saying I'll probably cover this in next month, even though it's just the beginning of this little cycle, but very similar. I had my best night of the season so far. Not too many nights before we're recording this, and it was on the Super Strike darter, like you're saying. So check back next month. I'll fill you in on that one, maybe.
Yeah, great.
Unless something trumps it. But
great. Yeah, great.
For this month's look here into my logbook, I did something that I was kind of messing around with throughout the season. I don't think I even had really told you that I was throwing dead eels again from time to time this year.
Well, you did because of the sharks.
Well,
so you were out, and then you ran into the sharks with them. That's the only reason I know.
But that made me stop again because we had the sharks. I didn't want to keep dealing with it, so I kind of pulled away from them for a little while. And then when I got into a cycle coming into September, where I didn't feel the sharks were around anymore or as much as they were, because for whatever reason we run into them in like right at the end of July through August, and then like a light switch, they're gone. I've got ideas and thoughts on it. Won't get into that all today with what contributes to that, but I kind of feel once we hit, roughly September 1st, not that they're looking at a calendar, that I'm safe from running into them or them being around as often. So I got back to throwing the eels again. And again, just the dead eels. I actually this year, one of my goals was to hopefully buy some eels and get back into live eel fishing, but it just didn't happen yet. So the dead eels are the simple fallback because I always have a stock in my freezer ready to go. They were originally for rigging, but that kind of got tweaked out. But so I started fishing the dead eels pretty consistently going into September. And it was kind of something I've been playing with this year. Back when I used to fish the eels all the time, I would fish live eels on the circle hook, even before it was a requirement. But for the dead eels, I would still fish, whether it was the rigged eel or just a single hook on the dead eel. I would fish a large, straightforward J hook because of the way that I would set the hook and the hit would occur. I would never get a deep hooking. It just wasn't a factor, but so be it. The rules are what they are now. So it took me a little while to get back in the swing of the dead eels with the circle. And I started to kind of figure it out again this month, really dedicating time to it. Got into a couple of fish. But on the nights when I had that good bite, sort of like you're saying, like it was a good For this season, it was great.
Right, right,
September.
right. I didn't want to keep saying that. Right, yeah, right.
Comparing it to the rest of the year, it was great. Comparing it to like the long-term average, it was still kind of a dumpy month catch-wise. But when I was getting on fish and had some pretty good nights, as I always do, I try to, if I'm doing, if it's already turned up to an 8, I try to turn it up to a 10 or even an 11 if I can. I'm
Yes.
trying to see.
Never settling.
Yeah, is there something? What are the odds that what I'm throwing is the best?
Yes.
And one of the misconceptions, even admittedly, that I have is like bait is always going to do better. I've talked about this. I've written about it with chunking, that I have this idea that if I only had chunks on the night when I don't have chunks, I'd be catching, and it just is not true. And it reared its ugly head several times this month, and that I was on a good bite, whether I was catching them on the Super Strike Darter or the Z-Man shads that I was throwing, or just different other lures. I was cycling in the dead eel because in my mind, I'm like, all right, I'm throwing something natural. If I'm doing, if I'm catching them up to 15 pounds on the artificial, God, I'm going to do so much better if I throw that dead eel in front of them. Because again, it's something in their natural environment that they're used to seeing. I'm not trying to replicate something to eat. I'm putting something in front of them. And every single night that I did that, it did not pay off any better than the artificials. If anything, it was actually a step down in quantity landed by easily. I absolutely did not land nearly as many fish. And only one of the 3 nights where I cycled in the eels with the artificials did the largest fish of the night actually come on the dead eel. It was interesting. And it wasn't a great fish. It was like high 20-pound, solid fish. I was not, displeased by any extent by the way the season was going. I was happy to have gotten it. But on that night, I was standing very close to my fishing partner for the evening, to the point where we could communicate with each other without even raising our voice. We could just have a standard conversation. So we were fishing the same damn water. And while we were both hitting the fish early on the artificials, I was like, all right, I'm going to test, see what happens. I'm going to throw the eel on. And he did not slow down the catching while he was throwing the same artificial that we were throwing before. Bang, fish, fish, fish. And I'm throwing that eel, swinging it through the same spot. And it wasn't a distance thing. I'll get that right off the table because the fish were short. I mean, you had to snub your cast back with the artificial. So even if I'm doing a full eel cast, I'm still right in that same range. I was getting hits. I was missing a lot of fish. So I'm assuming those are smaller ones. So it was almost like you expect to switch from artificial to natural and get more and bigger. And what was happening is I was getting fewer and smaller.
That's
It was like the total opposite. I mean, to the point where I'd switch off of the eel, go right back into throwing the artificials, and pick up right where I left off. And then I kept cycling, and then it just became, to the detriment of my total catch on the night, where I stubbornly said, I am going to throw this damn eel until it finally does better than the artificial. And granted, that is when on the night that I got the bigger fish on the eel, I was able to cull it out at that point. But I think I just willed that damn fish to hit more than anything.
That's really funny.
And it was funny. I said it to the fishing partner that night, the other nights when I was on my own and cycling through. I mean, I was like, vocalizing out loud to absolutely no one being around at times that it's got to work, but why isn't it? Like, I'm talking this through with no one in particular, no one around, of why isn't it happening? But it's just, there's sometimes it's just not the right presentation, and this spot.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, this spot, when I used to eel fish a lot, was more of a live eel location for me. Not going to go into dissecting the eel spots in today's episode. We do have some other time when I would categorize live, dead, rigged, etc. for the spots. But even when I used to fish the live eels, and they always produced better here than the dead or almost dead eels, you could still catch on the dead ones. It was just such a stark contrast that it really solidified that it doesn't come down to what you want or you think should be doing it. It's like the spot, to a degree, is dictating what the best presentation
That's right.
is. And the way a dead eel sometimes just tumbles along doesn't look natural enough versus, let's say, a 1 ounce jig head and a 7-inch shad body swimming correctly.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to ask. Do you think the dead eel was because the fish were looking for activity, or was it because you weren't presenting it the same way? You see what I'm saying?
I think I think there's a degree of unnatural swim or presentation that occurs on the dead eel sometimes when certain
Okay.
conditions, whether it's the way the current is flowing
Okay.
or the wave activity, because I've seen it, I've kind of played around with it, in just like I test new plugs, I'll test during the day in non-fishing scenarios, but in locations that represent where I'm fishing to see what it does. Meaning, what does a dead eel ripped across the current look like versus a live eel or a drifted dead eel? So I have some things that I'll do where I fish it sluggo, like the 12-inch sluggo. The way that I fish that at this location is sort of based off what I've seen a dead eel do that doesn't look natural. When you're constantly moving a dead eel, it might wiggle and wriggle and look eelish, but then there's times where it like flips upside down and spins around, and to the point where sometimes the hook catches it in its midsection because it's just doing these
Oh.
weird things. But the sluggo, you can kind of, you coast it, you glide it across. So I try to do that with the eel, and I really just think it comes down to here because you can kind of do okay at times when the current isn't quite as strong. You can do well on the dead. I think it has to do with just the dead eel just doesn't present right.
Okay.
If there's an aspect of the strike from a striped bass that is visual. Now we know that is very limited at night, but I still think there's a piece of it, even if it's the last second where they have a split second to say yes or no. If it's just enough of a no, I still believe they're going to hold off. And I think too often that dead eel at this one, in this conditions at the spot, it says no just enough where they hesitate. That whereas the lures coming across and presenting properly, or the live eel looking like a live eel fighting the current, doesn't have that last second turn off. Because like I said, I was getting hits, but it was the smaller fish. The reason I feel it was the smaller fish was because it's the like tap, drop the rod, and they're gone. They're not, when the bigger bass hit that dead eel, they hammer it, they're on, you're hooked. It's not a concern. But the little
Right.
guys, you have to grab the tail, just like they do with plugs. They just kind of do stupid stuff with it. So it's like, and I feel the little guys are less inclined to turn off at the last second if that little no isn't, they don't have that no trigger yet. They haven't any better. Instincts aren't there to make them to hold back. Whereas, making a fish sound like a human, they're smarter when they're bigger and older and et
They're
cetera.
more
They've seen,
experienced.
yeah, they're working off those experiences. So, it was definitely a theme that I was seeing though, that the way that those dead eels, it was great to catch on them when I did, but it like further solidified, and it might even turn me off a little bit from fishing them the rest of the season in a way, because I've sort of had that romantic thought in the back of my head, like, I want to start catching on the eels again, start throwing them. It'll produce. If I only had chunks, if I only had eels, it didn't work so well, at least
Didn't
at this
work out.
spot.
Yeah.
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 Elsewhere, perhaps I might break them out, but I'll even say the last 2 times that I went back to that spot after having brought the dead eels with me all month long, last 2 times I didn't even bother. I just went pure artificial.
And in some ways that makes things more complicated because now you got to carry multiple, like that's one of the beauty things of chunking and eels that often gets cited is like you don't have to choose a plug because you've got the right one. Well,
Mm-hmm.
now you got to go back and bring all your plugs. So, but it makes it a little more complicated. But it also makes it easier because now you can be like, well, I'm not even going to think about it because that's
Yeah.
no longer true. So I'm just going to leave that alone. Now, Toby, I have a question for you because we didn't discuss this ahead of time, so I'm going to put you on the spot because one of our
All right.
listeners asked us, hey, can you guys, when you do your lessons from the log, just give us your top couple of lures that were the best producing for that month? And you triggered me because you were talking about, lure being better than something. And I went, oh, crap, that's right. That guy, I don't remember who it was, don't remember when he asked me, but I was like, that's a good idea. So let's do that really quick if you want.
Yeah.
You want me to go first?
You go first, because the YouTubers are going to see that I'm going to step away about 8 feet because I want to grab the lure to get the right name of it off the floor here. So
Okay, great. Okay, great.
you
Okay, great. I'll
talk
go
about
first.
yours, and I'll be gone and right back.
So we'll do this every single time now. We'll try to move it to the maybe toward the front, not the end, but really quickly. They're also probably not going to change super a lot every single time. It's not like we're going to give you new lures every time. This is going to be a genuine, authentic, 100% view of like what were the top producing plugs for us over that last period of time we're talking about. For me, there's really no question. There's two that were by far probably caught me 97% of my fish. And that's a Super Strike Darter and the 9-inch 24/7 needlefish. Now, there's one more other notable plug, just two. The Hydro Minnow one night. Well, maybe I should, because maybe that was actually October. So I'll stop there. Hold on. I'll back up. We'll leave that one. But I'm going to talk about on the next edition the Mulletron, the Z-Man Mulletron. And for sure, that also was one of the most notable plugs. Not just because it was new, which is why I'll talk about it, but because fish materialized on it. And I'll get into that more when we talk about the gear rather than do it now. So those are the three I would definitely bring up.
Well, for me, it's just one.
Okay.
That was far and away more productive than everything else, surprisingly so, which I'll got a plan for talking on this, thoughts on this down the road, but it was the Z-Man diesel minnows, and specifically the 7-inch. So essentially a 7-inch shad body fished on a jig head. And it was something that I was playing around with throughout this season. It's something that I had been theorizing, not specifically with, the theory wasn't specific to the Z-Man diesel minnows. It was more about the shad bodies in general, which if I want to give away a little tidbit, you can read about in the, what edition of Surfcasters Journal?
Oh, the upcoming edition.
The upcoming edition.
86? Oh, man, I should know. I think it's 86.
It'll be coming up, because by the time
it's coming out very soon.
Out,
it'll be out. Yeah. But I think we might beat it barely, but it's coming out.
Yeah. So I got into it talking about it then, the theory, the ideas, but that diesel minnow was, I mean, 95% of the fish that I caught this month were on
That's
that.
Cool. That's really cool.
And in a variety of locations. Not just like, hey, I was fishing deep water outflows all month. This was like open beach, rocky beach, all sorts of locations where a lot of other plugs have produced in the past. So for me, it's not even a question, the diesel minnows.
Interesting. So that's really interesting. And there was something I meant to do at the beginning. I'm going to do it here at the end, which is probably appropriate anyways. I'm going to round us out. I wanted to mention really quick my condolences to Michael Adams, his family. Michael Adams, a Connecticut angler, recently passed away with a long-term battle with cancer. I did not know him personally. I only knew him through our long and very meaningful exchanges via email and on Instagram. He's someone who really, really cared about the fishery. He did not like the way that fish were being treated, specifically in the rivers in Connecticut, the holdovers, but throughout the season. And he seemed to be a really good person, a really great person, and he was one of our veterans who he believes that the reason he ended up with cancer was something that he saw during his active duty. He was Special Forces. I just wanted to give a shout out and give my condolences and say that he will be missed and that we've lost someone from this community, that, you know, in this wide world of fishing, I run into all kinds of people. I don't remember them. I don't remember their names. I don't remember their faces. People come up to me like, hey, Jerry. I'm like, hey. And they're like, remember, we've talked 47 times. And I'm like, okay, sorry. I don't literally ever remember a single one of them. But Mike was someone who left a little bit of an impact on me. And so I just wanted to give him a bit of a remembrance and say that we lost a good one, and to, you know, thank our veterans out there, because some of them really do give all. So that's what I wanted to say. So thanks, Mike, and you will be missed. This has been a weekly edition of the Surfcast Podcast. You can find out more about the podcast at surfcastpodcast.com, or definitely check us out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, the Surfcast Podcast.